What's good, Fantasy and Frames family? Welcome back to Fourth and Frames. I go by the name of Drew, and I'll be your host this evening. Joining me, as always, are my boys Rhett and Chris. And tonight, we're taking fantasy football debates to the courtroom. These guys are going to duke it out. I'll be the judge, jury, and executioner. And not only that, we're going to be giving you some sleepers for redraft leagues for you degenerates that are already prepping for 2023 or possibly getting some reps in right now over on Underdog as we speak. So, with that being said, Tyler, play our music, baby. Let's go. All right, before we go any further, make sure to like the stream, subscribe to the channel, and smack that little bell that's going to pop up to make sure that you're notified every time the Fantasy and Frames Network pushes out new content. While you're here, make sure to go over to Twitter, give our show a follow at Fourth and Frames, and go gas up my boys at FF Chris B, at our Manual Sports. And don't forget to show our man behind the glass some love, Tyler, who can be found at FF Tyler Hill, as well as over on the Dynasty 365 show. If you're not already checking that out, what are you doing? Now, speaking of Twitter, if you're dropping any comments over on Twitter, we can't see them on the show, so make sure to come join us on YouTube so that you can jump into the conversation with us. So, Chris, how you doing, my man?
I'm doing great. College spring games over the past weekend, the NFL draft coming up. There's no better time in football.
Absolutely. Rhett, how we doing tonight, man? You ready to plead your case or what?
Man, I'm ready to plead my case. I'm doing well, though. He's talking about college spring games. I do have to say, the fact that Louisiana native Arch Manning may or may not suck is a whole nother situation. But maybe that's a campus to Canton thing we're going to talk about later on. I don't know.
It's cold out here, man. These kids don't have any time to get acclimated before they're starting to be called bust. But before we take things to the courtroom, there's been some news that's been happening over the last couple of days. There's a big payday we might need to talk about. So just yesterday morning, Jalen Hurts and the Eagles agreed to a 5-year, $225 million contract extension that not only makes him the highest paid player in NFL history, but includes 180 M's guaranteed and a no trade clause. So, fellas, what's your thoughts on the deal with Hurts and the Eagles?
I love it. I think he deserves it. When you look at his career path when he was at Alabama into Oklahoma, it's well-deserved. He worked hard to get there. He was the first true freshman to start for Alabama. He took Alabama to back-to-back national championship games. He was benched for Tua in the second half of his second national title game. He cheered on Tua from the bench. He stayed with the team. He went back in once Tua broke his hip. And then he transferred after that season over to Oklahoma, where he was a Heisman finalist. He was drafted in the second round by the Eagles. Questions about this guy's arm all over social media of whether or not he can do it. He beat out Carson Wentz, led the Eagles to the Super Bowl, and now the dude is getting paid, man. Board man gets paid.
Yeah, man, that guy, first off, I'm going to say this. It couldn't have happened to a better person. Mm-hmm. With a guy like Jalen Hurts, he's always done things the right way. Like Chris mentioned, when he got benched in favor of Tua, he wasn't over there pouting. He was cheering that man on. He was doing things the right way. He gets into the league. He continues to grind, has that year one where people are like, can he really be that dude? Even after year two, they're kind of like, okay, he's improved, but can he throw the football? Well, he showed it last year, put the guys around him, put an A.J. Brown around him, give him a year two Devontae Smith. Let Miles Sanders do what he does best in between the tackles. Add Kenny Gainwell in year two. When he has dudes around him, he produced. And all he's shown so far is that upper trajectory. I don't see where there is a point where we don't see that happen. I don't think this is a guy that's going to get complacent once he has that money, because the money's there. The direct deposit is hit. He's feeling good. He probably bought himself something really nice for his family or his wife or whoever. Great for him. But, for him, it's probably let's get back to it. Let's get back to grinding. So great for him. Happy for him, man.
Yeah, I think you're exactly right on his mindset, too. That was something that something about Hurts that I always knew. I wasn't sure how good it could be, but if you go back even, high school going into college, every single year, he always got better. So that was one thing you could count on. And, that's just continued to trend that way. So shout out to Hurts, man. Good for getting the bag. So not only are quarterbacks getting paid, but the NFL draft just 10 days away. Smoke screen season is upon us. So let's go through some recent NFL draft rumors. Y'all let me know if you're going to buy or sell these. So, Rhett, there are some whispers that one of the top 4 quarterbacks will slide out of the top 10. Do you think this will be the case? And if so, who's it going to be?
First off, it is the NFL draft. Someone is always going to slide. Every year it happens. We saw it last year, was that quarterback draft overrated because of smokescreen season? Absolutely. We can absolutely acknowledge in hindsight, Malik Willis was never that dude. Kenny Pickett was probably the best of the bunch, and he's looked like he's going to be above average at best. So with that this year, this draft class in terms of quarterbacks is much more highly regarded. You have your Bryces, you have your Strouds, you have your emerging Anthony Richardson. Hendon Hooker getting a lot of love lately too. But, if there's somebody that we have to bank on their demise and say that the slide is going to happen, you have to look at Will Levis, and here's why. Over the years, as someone who has failed miserably at evaluating these quarterbacks, I fall in love with toolsy guys. And I started to do that with Will Levis this year, but then I thought about it. I'm like, several years ago, there was a certain Central Florida quarterback who was obnoxiously good looking, super muscular, toolsy, all those things. His name was Blake Bortles. And while he did find his fame later on due to the NBC hit show The Good Place, and all those jokes, it didn't really work out. So you hate to see it for any player because you want to see them all succeed. You want to show love. You don't want to hate. But if you have to bank on a guy who hasn't really proven himself, the accuracy hasn't been there. Joe talked about it last week. He might be a little too muscular. He may not be that flexible. It might have to be Will Levis that we're going to look at and say, you can see the slide happening with him.
Yeah, unfortunately, I think you might be right, man. It pains me to say it because I want to see him succeed, but I'm not getting good vibes from Levis either. All right, so Rhett kind of alluded to it, but Chris, there's one other quarterback. There's some rumors swirling regarding that, this guy might be getting some first-round buzz. Just a month ago, we weren't really hearing this, but his stock's starting to trend up. There's a possibility we might get a 5th quarterback in the first round. What are your thoughts? Is Hendon Hooker going to be a first-round quarterback come draft day?
No, I don't think so. And I think you alluded to it at the top with it just being a smoke screen, the injury to his leg, his late breakout age. He does seem to have it between the ears, and he's got a decent arm, but all that tied into one, plus the other positions that are pretty well stacked in like the defensive side, offensive line, wide receivers, and such like that. If you're going to take someone like a Hendon Hooker in the first round, you're going to kind of want him to be a potential starter. I'm not saying that he can't be a potential starter in the NFL. I just don't see him going. I don't see 5 quarterbacks going in the first round this year.
Yeah, I kind of agree, man. I mean, honestly, we just talked about Jalen Hurts, but there's the possibility he could kind of follow the Jalen Hurts trajectory where he lands somewhere in the second round where it looks like they might have a presumed starter, but he ends up outplaying them. I mean, Hooker's an interesting case because he checks a lot of the boxes that you want from a college quarterback coming out, outside of the fact that he's a little older than you would want your college quarterback. And, the Tennessee offense is a little simplistic, I think you could say, so it's tough to really gauge how a quarterback in that offense could translate, but he checks a lot of the boxes, and he'll be an interesting one to study for sure. So, all right, one last rumor to hit you with before we get to the courtroom that I want to hear your guys' take on. So based on recent reports, it appears that wide receivers might come off the board a little later than most of the mock drafts that we've seen have predicted at this point. With one report going as far to say that JSN might be the only receiver taken in the first round. So I ask you guys, how many wide receivers do you have coming off the board in the first round?
Well, if I'm going to look at it, and I'm going to say this, I think there are 3 dudes that are worthy of a first round draft pick. Obviously, you have JSN, who is far and away seen as the best guy in this draft. Two other guys that I really love are QJ. You know, everyone makes a big deal of the drops, but at the end of the day, there are so few alphas in this class that if a guy's 6'3" and 215 and running a 4.5, I mean, you have to think some team in the league is going to be willing to take a first round flyer on that guy, because at the end of the day, you can't teach athleticism. And then lastly, the third guy that I'm just, maybe it's my personal bias because he's my favorite receiver in the draft, but I'm a big Zay guy. I think Zay is just, he's special. You know, whenever there was the portal talk, you know, there was a guy that they said, you know, he might end up at Alabama. And he ends up sticking it out at, of all places, Boston College, and still shining and still putting his first round name out there. So I think there are three guys that can go in the first round and probably deserve to go in the first round. Whether that happens, I'm not quite sure, but that's where I am on that.
Yeah, I got same thing. Three wide receivers going in the first. Just I got QJ slipping to be an early second round pick. I got JSN, Addison, and Zay Flowers all going in the first. With QJ, it's just a physicality thing for me. He's got the size, he's got the speed. He just lacks that physicality to go up and get the ball, to use that size and speed to make those contested catches. And that's a big thing when you have that big body, is to get those contested catches. And he just lacks a little bit. He's always going to leave you wanting more when you're watching him play. So for me, I just got the three.
Okay, so three apiece, but there was one name that was different for each of you guys. I was going to ask you if Addison was going to be there for you, since that was, you know, notably missing for Rez. So we got Addison being slided by one guy, QJ being slided by the other. Now, you guys just need to be prepared for the YouTube comments asking you guys why you hate those wide receivers so much. So just, you know, be prepared to defend yourself, because there is no in between. You either got to love these guys or hate them. So you just be ready for that. But you guys are going to be no strangers to defending yourself and your opinions, because that's exactly what we're about to do right now. I don't want to wait any longer. Let's go ahead and jump into the Fantasy and Frames Fantasy Football Courtroom, first edition, first time doing this. So with that being said, Chris, we're going to start this off with some IDP stuff. Is Roquan Smith the definitive IDP one in 2023?
Roquan Smith is the definitive LB1, IDP1 in 2023. And it's without a doubt 118 tackles last season, 57 assisted. He's 26 years old, entering his prime as an NFL linebacker. He tied his career high in sacks with 5. He had a career high in defensive snaps, all while being traded midseason from the Chicago Bears to the Baltimore Ravens. He's a run-stopping linebacker who went from a more pass-happy division in the NFC North to the AFC North, who had 2 teams in the top 10 in carries in 2022. I don't see that changing. Last season, he was LB2 in average points scored per week using the Fantasy and Frames-based scoring, which you should all be using, only behind the IDP stud, Foyesade Olukun. I hope I did your name right there, Foye. For me, it's his ability to attack the quarterback that puts him over Bolton. Both high tackle rate players, but Bolton lacks the sacks, which lead to a high rate of fumbles. If you look at last season, the top 18 players in fumbles are QBs. And just like an offensive player, those big plays is what makes those guys pull vault into those wide receiver 1, RB1 finishes at the end of the week. It's those high impact plays, and Roquan Smith has a better chance at getting those high impact plays for fantasy scoring.
All right, Red, you got a rebuttal for him? What's up, man?
All right. So first off, you let them know who I was going to come with. And my guy, like, unconditionally, give me Nick Bolton. Like, I love who he is as a player. And let's just start. You want to give the Roquan Smith numbers in total tackles. Nick Bolton out-tackled Roquan Smith last year and had 180 total tackles. Were there less sacks? Absolutely. Were there more highlight plays? Maybe. So if we keep looking at it, you look at Nick Bolton, and I see a guy who plays on a defense that, frankly, is not that great. They find themselves in a lot of shootout games. So if you have one guy, one stud who is around the ball at all times, and he has that opportunity to make those plays, because let's face it, we're not sure if Leo Chenal is going to be that guy, then you have to ride that beast. And, yeah, you mentioned, and I love the fact that Roquan Smith is entering his prime. Well, I've got to tell you this. My man Nick Bolton is neck and neck with Roquan Smith while being 3 years younger. He's still 23 years of age, man. And look, you look at the measurable. Sure, Roquan Smith is the more explosive player. He has the 4.5 40. He does all these things. He went to the big school. He went to Georgia. Oh, we love it. Great for Roquan. Love that for him. Great. He plays in Baltimore. Ray Lewis. Oh, holy hands, prayer hands. Let's get it. We love it for you, Roquan. But look, at the end of the day, what I care about is my man producing at all times. Baltimore is putting their guys in position to make plays at the linebacker position. Always have, always will. Nick Bolton is doing this without a defensive system that is doing that for him. So you can make that argument that he's putting up equal defensive production in a lesser defensive system. And you mentioned Roquan Smith being behind Foye last year in the fantasy and frame scoring, which, by the way, great drop. But in, traditional scoring, what I found was that Nick Bolton was actually linebacker 2 last year in total scoring, and Roquan Smith was linebacker 3. So, there it is. And fantasy football, as we know, is a projection-based game this time of year. So with all good projections come from good history. And if you're looking for good history at a young age, and sometimes you just got to trust your gut, my gut says Nick Bolton, linebacker 1, IDP 1, 2023.
Okay, those are some tough arguments. I can't lie, man. Y'all aren't making my job easy tonight. So I might get investigated after this, but I might be a little biased because we did just have the Fantasy and Frame Startup Dynasty Draft with IDP included. One of us three might have taken Roquan Smith as his first defensive player off the board. So maybe I'm a little biased, but I got to lean with Chris here on Roquan Smith, at least for next season with the full season in that Baltimore defensive system. I think he's got another in him. Now, I'll say this, Rhett. You're kind of with the production and the age mixed in there, you're kind of making me question my decision on if I made the right call in that dynasty league moving forward. Maybe I should have went with Nick Bolton over Roquan. But for 2023, I got to give the nod to Chris on this one. Now,
you got to know your audience, Rhett. You got to know your audience, buddy.
he went and studied the draft board before he decided what side he was going to pick. Now, before we get on to the second one, there was a question dropped by Gator J that I wanted to save for right now with us talking IDP. So there's some, speaking of draft rumors, there's some rumors now that the Texans sound like they might be trading back from number 2 overall. It sounds like it might be Bryce Young or bust. And if Carolina goes Bryce Young, they might be looking to move back or to take a defensive lineman at number 2. What do you guys think? Do they grab a quarterback even if it's not Bryce, or what are they doing?
Look, I'm going to go ahead and say this, is that I'm a big proponent, once again, as we discussed last week, I'm a big proponent of building from the inside out. And like we also mentioned last week, the Eagles practically made a Super Bowl waiting on a quarterback that they developed and then having that fantastic, dominant offensive and defensive line. So look, if you can find your absolute guy that you know is going to be a stud on the defensive line for the next decade in that second pick, and you're comfortable, God forbid you're comfortable taking a Willis or a Richardson or somebody like that. It's a risky play. But if you've done your homework and you feel good about it, let's be honest, if they do that and it doesn't work out, Nick Caserio is putting his neck on the line, making a call like this. He absolutely is. Because if CJ Stroud ends up being this really good perennial Pro Bowl quarterback, or even pretty good and can manage a game and win some games for you from time to time, and one of these guys completely bust, then he's out of a job. So,
Chris, what do you think, man? They trading back, or are they going to stick and take a quarterback?
I think you got to stick and take a quarterback. If Stroud's there, you got to pick him up. He's going to be that guy that you're going to look back on this draft and think to yourself as a general manager, how did I let this guy fall past me? But again, there's other guys like Will Anderson, Jalen Carter that can be generational at their position too. So you're kind of in a rock and a hard place. But the most important position in football is that quarterback. And if you can lock up a rookie quarterback on a rookie deal for 3 to 4 years, you'll have the money to invest in a veteran to bolster your defensive line for those years to make your team better. So for me, if I'm a Houston Texan GM and Stroud or Bryce Young is there, I'm jumping at one of the two.
Yeah, man, it's easy to say, oh, we'll just kick the can down the road one more year and we'll draft Caleb Williams next year. But you can't. It's so tough to account for what kind of difference the new coaching staff and the new guys they're bringing in, what kind of difference it's going to make. Like, you can't guarantee you're going to pick 1 overall next year or 2 overall next year. And
as we've seen, they lost their first overall pick at the end of the year this year when they won and Chicago lost.
Right, exactly. Like you can't predict that type of stuff. So just say, oh, we'll just tank for Caleb next year. It's a lot easier said than done. So yeah, I mean, you can't take a quarterback just to take a quarterback. If you really don't believe in those guys, that's one thing. But yeah, I think it's kind of risky just assuming you're going to be right back in this position next year. It sends a bad message to the fan base too, frankly. Like, hey, don't worry, we're going to suck really bad next year too, and then maybe things will get better. All right, so debate number 2. I would say the 2 most popular scoring formats in fantasy football right now. If they get to pick 3rd pick next year and don't take a quarter, yeah, exactly, Gator, exactly. So if you had to pick a scoring format, half or full PPR, which way are you going? Now, we kicked it off with Chris last time, so Rhett, we'll let you go first on this one.
All right, guys. Full disclosure, I'm just going to go ahead and say this. I get the arguments against the argument that I'm about to make. Full PPR scoring, you look at it, and people are like, it weighs catching a simple pass way too much. I hear it. I understand it. I feel you. I empathize with it. But I'm an old school fantasy football guy. I've been playing for a long time, and I remember an era where running backs mattered. And in full PPR scoring, there is a much greater chance that running backs matter more than they would in a half PPR format. So old school fantasy football players like me, we miss running backs mattering. They used to matter more. So with that full PPR format, my belief and my personal preference when drafting guys is that those receptions that you get out of a running back, you look at an Austin Eckler last year who had something like 105, 107 catches. Think of the value that a guy like that, an old school fantasy football player like myself, that's a huge season. That makes it fun. And furthermore, let's just talk about it. Why do we play fantasy football? We play fantasy football to have fun, first and foremost. Maybe we play to win some money, but we play first and foremost to have fun. Full PPR means more points. More points equals more fun. More fun means more engagement, guys. And you know what? More engagement means more growth for fantasy football platforms like ours. And you know what happens, guys? At the end game, we all get Tahitian private islands if we play full PPR fantasy football. Get at me.
Oh, dear. I mean, it's going to be hard to rebuttal that. You just be-rabbited me at the top of your argument, just telling me why full PPR isn't that good, and you get the argument. So I don't even know what to do. You 8-miled me, Rhett. But for me, half PPR, it's quality over quantity. Full PPR often rewards volume regardless of the impact of the game. With half PPR, you get the best of both worlds without the excessiveness. 0.5 PPR rewards the RB who makes the crucial catch for first down, or the wide receiver snake in one for a touchdown, and not just guys who get stat padded in garbage time. It also offers strategic flexibility. With half PPR, you can rely on the traditional running back who gains points on the ground, which creates roster diversity and not leaving you to rely on heavily prioritizing the pass-catching running backs, adding depth to the player pool. And ultimately, points are fun and all, but it kind of leads to more flukes. And those kind of flukes, when you lose, if you're trying to make the playoffs or a championship game, because Jamal Agnew comes out with 10 catches and that guy just happened to have him in his flex, and he goes off for 15 points. So full PPR leagues can sometimes create an unpredictable environment where players who have little impact on the game can have inflated fantasy scores. In half PPR, the scoring is more balanced and tends to reward consistent and reliable players who make a significant impact on the field. In conclusion, why settle for inflated reception scores from players who don't have much impact on the game? And you can get the best of both worlds from 0.5 PPR.
Because Tahitian Islands. Anyway.
Yeah, so I mean, I kind of had some thoughts coming into this one. I thought I already had my mind made up because I'm whenever it comes to fantasy scoring, I'm the old school half PPR, get off my lawn, don't mess with my scoring type of guy typically. But Rhett, you kind of sold me, man. I mean, if I can get my own private island, sign me up, man. So if Fantasy and Frames is going to take off and I'm going to get my own island just because we converted everybody to full point PPR, I'm converted, man. Sign me up.
That's what I'm here for, baby.
So the next item to talk about, last year's rookie receivers were an exciting bunch, and there's some guys getting some significant hype coming into their sophomore season. So which sophomore receiver, Chris Olave or Garrett Wilson, Rhett, are you buying in 2023?
All right. First, me and Chris are both New Orleans Saints guys. So since I got it first, I get to take my guy first. I'm taking Chris Olave. And look, here's why. First, we cannot discount the marked quarterback improvement that Chris Olave is going to see in 2023. Is Derek Carr perfect? No, he's not. He's not Patrick Mahomes. He's not Joe Burrow. But you know what he's not either? He's not Andy Dalton. He's not Jameis Winston. He's quite a cut above those two guys. For me, that's a huge selling point already. And look, we're going to start getting into the nitty-gritty of it last year with an Andy Dalton who couldn't push the ball downfield last year. And with Jameis Winston, Chris Olave had 119 targets, 72 catches, which is a darn solid rookie season, over 1,000 yards, only 4 touchdowns. But you have to assume in year 2, put on low body weight, learn the league a little bit, that positive touchdown regression is coming for him in year 2. Last year, he finishes wide receiver 25 in full PPR scoring. Note that, full PPR scoring, Chris. And that made him basically a low-end wide receiver 2. He was the top wide receiver 3, so basically a wide receiver 2. So my opinion this year is that with that Derek Carr improvement, you're looking at a guy whose upside pushes him into that wide receiver 1 conversation this year, 100%, no doubt in my mind on that. And even last year, playing with Andy Dalton, for the most part, Chris Olave had 1,670 total air yards last year, which basically means, was there some missed opportunity in there? Absolutely. And I get that one of those air yard games was nearly 400 yards, but still, you take that away, you cut that in half, that's still like a 1,500 air yard season, which fantastic. Sign me up for that guy who has that sort of upside. Only had 11 red zone targets last season. So if we just get a slight uptick in that to the neighborhood of 15 to 20 red zone targets, then he likely ends up with 1 to 3 more touchdowns. And Chris Olave with 80 catches, 1,200 yards, 7-8 touchdowns, that's easily a wide receiver 1 we're talking about in that conversation. So there is also a real possibility, because I do not trust the direction that franchise is going in, that the New Orleans Saints are going to be stuck in a lot of negative game scripts for this coming season. So as a fan, and really the only major factor I see, which isn't really a factor because over the past 4 years, Michael Thomas has not been a healthy player. So we can't depend on him being healthy now because he hasn't done it in 4 years. So Garrett Wilson is probably going to be the alpha on his team. But you know what he's likely inheriting? A guy that he doesn't know, a guy that may not trust him, and a guy who certainly is a pain in the neck and a curmudgeon in Aaron Rodgers. So for me, Olave or bust, baby. We know they're vibing. We know everything's good. Happy times are here again. The Saints are going to the Super Bowl. Let's go, baby.
Go. I concede you win. But curmudgeon or not, Aaron Rodgers, who above anything else still has it as an NFL QB. He still has all the abilities to produce a wide receiver 1. And looking at the Jets' wide receiver room. Wilson is him, with Zach Wilson, Joe Flacco, Mike White, and CFL legend Chris Streveler. Wilson was able to become a 1,000-yard, 120-plus target wide receiver, which led to him finishing as a mid-wide receiver too for fantasy managers. And look, air yards are great and all. It's a good measuring tool to predict opportunity for wide receivers. And as good as Olave was at collecting those air yards, Wilson was right behind him. He was the offensive rookie of the year last season, and he'll be looking to add to his already impressive resume. The Jets added Lazard, Mecole Hardman. They traded Elijah Moore. Wilson is the bona fide wide receiver one there, who is getting a back-to-back MVP as his future QB, hopefully. Statistically, metrically, these two guys are pretty similar, close in reception, close in yardage, same amount of touchdowns. Wilson had a bit more red zone targets, but the one thing that is going to separate Wilson and Olave this season is the quarterback play. It's Aaron Rodgers and his ability to produce league-winning wide receivers, something Carr has not been able to do on a consistent basis. He's able to produce wide receiver ones, just not consistently. And like you mentioned, I don't know where these New Orleans Saints are going this year with the offensive line struggles, the defensive struggles. It's going to be hard to see what they're going to be able to produce offensively. My projection, and this is a big projection for Garrett Wilson this season, 145 targets, 105 receptions, 1,200 yards, and 6.5 touchdowns. A big wide receiver 1 year for the former Buckeye.
Okay, so 2 sophomore receivers, 2 quarterback upgrades. The thing that kind of breaks the tie for me is whenever you look at quarterback upgrades across the board, Derek Carr is a good upgrade, but he's no Aaron Rodgers at the end of the day.
Yeah.
And he might not be as easy to like, but if you're somebody that just loves watching quarterback play, he's somebody that you love. That dude's one of the best to sling it. And whenever you have a receiver, both these guys are extremely talented. But whenever you have a receiver as talented as Garrett Wilson, Aaron Rodgers stepping in to deliver the ball, and honestly, whenever it comes to the guys they're competing for targets with, the one person that just traded away would probably have been the guy I would have been most concerned of, compared to the guys they brought in, like Hardman and Lazard. Like, I would have been more worried about Elijah Moore, and they shipped him out of town. So on this one, it's close, but I got to give this one to Chris. So debate number 4, a couple quarterbacks to talk about. Deshaun Watson, Dak Prescott. Could you see one of these guys finishing as a top 6 quarterback this season? This is a tough ask. We know about the guys at the top, the Mahomes, Allen, Hurts, Burrow, Herbert. Those guys, they're all going to be up there in consideration already. Can one of these 2 guys squeeze in with a top 6 finish? Chris, which one you got?
I got Dak. And look, both of these guys have been there. They've been top 5 fantasy QBs for us in the past. Dak Prescott last season finished low-end QB, but he also missed 5 games due to injury. But when he came back, he had 6 finishes as a QB1. He has thrown for 30 or more touchdowns in 2 seasons, demonstrating his ability to find the end zone and rack up fantasy points. In addition to his passing touchdowns, Prescott has also shown prowess as a rusher, scoring 18 touchdowns in his first 3 seasons. This dual threat capability adds another layer of fantasy value to his game. Now, after that ankle injury, he wasn't the same rusher on the field as he was before that, but he was still able to get 2-3 touchdowns per season. And then you got the coaching change. Kellen Moore's out. Brian Schottenheimer's in as the offensive coordinator. Schottenheimer has a proven track record of success, having orchestrated high-scoring offenses in his previous roles. For instance, during his time with the Seattle Seahawks in 2020, the team set a franchise record in points scored. Schottenheimer's offensive expertise and familiarity with the Cowboys organization bode well for Prescott's fantasy prospects in the upcoming season. The Cowboys also added to their wide receiver room, adding the archer, field stretcher himself, Brandon Cooks. They already got a top 5 dynasty wide receiver in CeeDee Lamb and will most likely be adding in the draft, as it's been reported that multiple top-end wide receivers in this class have taken visits with the Dallas Cowboys. So in conclusion, when considering advanced analytics, including efficiency metrics, especially in the red zone, where he ranked first in red zone accuracy ratings and first in red zone completion percentage, he's got the touchdown production, he's got the new coaching change, he's got the offensive weapons. Dak Prescott has a strong case for a better fantasy option than Deshaun Watson heading into the 2023 season. His past performance combined with favorable circumstances make him a compelling choice for fantasy football managers looking for a reliable, high upside quarterback option.
And look, I love your argument. I don't agree that Brian Schottenheimer is an upgrade over Kellen Moore because I'm a big fan of that guy. But we're going to go ahead and digress and keep this rolling because I'm going to have to take the hot take side on this, and I'm going to have to go with Deshaun, and here's why. We can agree that last year it was shaky. Like, it was rough watching Deshaun last year. But, you know, that comes with a year off, all the suspension stuff, him taking that year to come back. So in order to give us a full picture of who Deshaun is, we really have to dig into that past. And that past, if we look at it, is as a top 6 quarterback. In 2019, he finishes as the quarterback 2. In 2020, he finishes as the quarterback 5 with 23.5 fantasy points per game. Actually better than he was in 2019. So he was getting better before all this inexcusable nonsense that he was partaking in. Let's just call it that. I'm not advocating for him as a person. I'm strictly talking fantasy in this situation. Here's where he adds value. You mentioned Dak's past as a running quarterback, and I'm going to give you Deshaun's present as a running quarterback. Last year, straight up value, he averaged 6 carries, 29.2 rushing yards per game. In only, 6-7 games, he finishes 16th in total quarterback rushing yards and was 11th in quarterback rushing yards per game. I know Dak wasn't doing that. I don't have the exact numbers, but they weren't that high. 1 year later, you have to look at his spot in this Browns offense and think that he has a year under his belt. He's a year more comfortable, and he's doing all these things. The weapons are there. Are they as fun as CeeDee Lamb and Tony Pollard and all these other guys? Maybe not, but if you look at them, Amari Cooper, excuse me, super solid last year. David Njoku. One of my favorite sleepers this year, DPJ, Donovan Peoples-Jones. Great field stretcher. Adding Elijah Moore, who, as Drew mentioned a while ago, I don't think he's dead quite yet. I just think the Jets got a little bit tired of him, and he kind of got in the doghouse last season. And there was a time in football where Deshaun Watson was seen as the premier deep ball thrower in the game. And who did we just mention that works great as a deep ball catcher? DPJ, Donovan Peoples-Jones. David Njoku up the seam. You know, there's athleticism there where they can possibly stretch the field and do those things. Njoku finally had that breakout season that we've been expecting for so long. Will there be questions until they're answered? Absolutely, yes, there will be. But in fantasy football, we know that the cheat code for quarterbacks is rushing yards. And in a full season, it is almost guaranteed that we're going to see Deshaun Watson have about 500 rushing yards and 4 to 5 rushing TDs. And those passing yards have to take that uptick this year. So with the full offseason, the passing game getting closer to his own numbers as well, plus that rushing upside, I'm going to go out on a limb here and say I think Deshaun has a strong case to be a potential fantasy quarterback 6 this season.
Yeah, and you didn't make that as easy as I thought it was going to be because I'm going to be honest with you. Last year, what I saw from Deshaun Watson, it scared me because, like, I don't mind taking a shot on players that are coming off of suspensions. You know, like DeAndre Hopkins last year, whenever he was coming back, whenever he was suspended. Whenever guys are suspended and they're not injured, you don't have to worry about them in terms of them coming back physically. You don't have to worry about them as much in terms of acclimating to the game. You know, they're staying in shape, things like that. I did not expect to see Deshaun Watson come out the way that he did last year. The running offense and things like that they have in Cleveland makes me a little bit nervous. One thing I'll say about Dak is he probably won't have the rushing yardage that Deshaun Watson will have, but you usually can count on him for like 4 to 6 rushing touchdowns. And their main red zone guy, Zeke, maybe they bring him back, maybe they don't. But as of right now, he's not on the roster, so you can possibly see him continue to retain that. I think with them bringing Brandon Cooks over, if they didn't make that move, if Brandon Cooks wasn't in the building for Dallas, I think I'd go Deshaun Watson. But for them having that secondary option, something that's a little bit more reliable than Michael Gallup, and letting Michael Gallup be the 3, I like where Dak's set up there. And I think that, if you're going to count on somebody that's not going to be a running quarterback to give you fantasy success, you have to have those passing yards and passing touchdowns. And as Chris pointed out, Dak has shown us he can do that. So I got it slightly as close. I'll say this. In Superflex, I'm definitely going Dak because there's less risk and quarterback is more important. In a 1-quarterback league, I'm a lot more comfortable taking a shot on Deshaun because you can recover a lot easier, if you miss out at your quarterback in a 1-quarterback league. But Superflex, I think I'm playing it safe. I think I'm leaning with Chris. I'm going to take Dak on this one.
I hit it here.
I feel bad for you. I feel bad for you, Rhett, because we have to cut our last question for the sake of time. But just full disclosure, unless Chris would have made a really, really great argument, I probably was going to side on you for the last one. And so I want to give you a little bit of credit. You laid out a great argument that we're going to roll through here. So I mentioned at the top of the show, for us degenerates that don't have anything else to do, the prep for 2023 has begun. There's a lot of you guys over on Underdog already doing best ball drafts. If you didn't check out the best ball show with Stacy and Keith Fleming, make sure you go to the Fantasy and Frames YouTube channel or wherever you find podcasts and check that out. They did a great job going through a best ball draft on Underdog live on the show. I highly recommend you checking it out on YouTube. You get the visual with the audio. It's a fun watch. So we're going to talk about some sleepers, some guys right now based on Underdog ADP or just based on how the fantasy community is looking at them at this point in the season that are going a little bit underdrafted right now based on how we feel. So, Chris, hit us with your first sleeper that you want to talk about tonight.
Now, unfortunately, I'm up in Canada. We do not have Underdog. So if any Canadian listeners or viewers, call your local prime minister or whatever it is, premier, and let them know that we want Underdog in Ontario. But my sleeper of this year is Juju Smith-Schuster of the New England Patriots. 157 vacated targets with the decimation of their wide receiver room. They lost Nelson Aguilar. They lost Jacoby Myers. Jacoby Myers had 18.8% of that target share. Looking at the Patriots offense, 6.8 yards per attempt, which would favor a player like Juju who makes his money in that spot. His average depth of target last season was 7.6 with the Kansas City Chiefs. 81% of the Patriots passing work came short of the sticks last year. 81%. That's printing money with Juju Smith-Schuster. That's an offense that works towards his strengths. And then they were top 10 in play action percentage last season. And now they're bringing in Billy O.B. They're bringing in Bill O'Brien from Alabama, who during his time with the Patriots ran a predominant play action offense to get those intermediate wide receivers open and into space. And what is Juju Smith-Schuster? He's an intermediate wide receiver. He's not an elite burner, but he has the speed off the line to create that separation for his quarterback to find them in that space. All that tied with the concepts and matchup attacking of Bill O'Brien is going to provide fantasy managers a great late round wide receiver that you're going to be able to draft right now. I believe he's going in between that wide receiver 45 to wide receiver 50 range, which is absolutely stealing. So for me, Juju Smith-Schuster is my number one sleeper heading into the year.
Yeah, I mean, I'm not even the hugest Juju fan, but wide receiver 50 is kind of absurd whenever you consider the guys that are outside of the Patriots offense now, the pass catchers that left. And I don't think the change at offensive coordinator can be talked about enough, because last year they basically had two guys that weren't even offensive coaches that were the offensive coordinators. And now you've got, Bill O'Brien, the general manager, wasn't very great, but Bill O'Brien, the coach, wasn't all that bad. So I think that is a huge thing. So I like that call a lot. And honestly, I didn't realize he was even going that late. That's kind of absurd. So for me, I'm thankful that I made the argument, or that I chose to side with Rhett for full PPR, because that scoring just helps me even more with this player that I'm going to talk about. So Antonio Gibson, running back for the Washington Commanders. That's my first sleeper for tonight. So the easiest selling point is that in full and half PPR leagues, this guy should see plentiful targets with no more J.D. McKissic there to take away the passing down work, which is an area that Gibson is really strong in. So last year he was 12th among running backs in yards per reception and 9th among running backs in yards per route run. And we saw last year down the stretch, Eric Bieniemy, the new offensive coordinator for the Commanders, I'm sure most of us fantasy players remember what Jerick McKinnon did down the stretch, go with 3 running back finishes inside the top 6 from week 14 to week 17. And now McKinnon was obviously playing in a better offense with Bieniemy compared to what Gibson will be playing in this year. But it gives you an idea of the type of role that Gibson can play. Because if anybody in this Washington Commanders backfield is prepared to play that role, it would be Antonio Gibson, especially with McKissic out the door. So right now he's sitting around running back 45 in underdog ADP, around running backs that don't even have teams right now, such as Kareem Hunt and Ezekiel Elliott, or even Elijah Mitchell, who is a much more distant RB2 on his own team than Gibson is behind Brian Robinson. And, I'm sorry to say this, Jorge, but, it's a potentially bad team that will potentially be playing a bunch of catch-up games, some garbage time that would better fit Gibson than it would Robinson. So not to mention the fact that on the ground, Gibson only had 3 rushing TDs last year, but had an expected TD count of 5.68. So we can hopefully expect some positive regression in the TD department on the ground as well. And I just happen to think that Gibson is an extremely underrated and underutilized running back. And overall, I think he's a better running back compared to Brian Robinson. But at the end of the day, it doesn't matter if I feel that way, if Ron Rivera disagrees. But I think with his, running back 45-ish ADP, I think that's a little bit too low. So that's my first sleeper. We got a wide receiver out of the way. We got a running back out of the way. Rhett, talk to us about a quarterback sleeper you like a lot right now.
Let's party, baby. Let's talk about Danny Dimes, Daniel Jones, New York Giants. Oh, my God. Let's get into it. All right. First things, Danny Dimes. One of these dudes. QB9 finished last year. Low-key, super productive. And guess what? Last year, he had career highs in passing yards, completion percentage, rushing yards, and passing touchdowns. I get it was 15. We didn't really have to discuss that. We could have left that off, but for full disclosure, it was only 15, so the bar wasn't that high. So while doing all this, he did it with the worst set of receivers in the league, and guess what? He adds himself one of probably the most important acquisitions this offseason. I'm ready to call him the tight end 2 in fantasy this year in Darren Waller, because there is some Travis Kelce vibes I'm getting there. Who else are they going to throw the ball to? Darren Waller is there for a reason. And so right there, he has an immediate upgrade in terms of his top target, and it's really not that close. It's a miles better. And he maintained Saquon Barkley, who I was going to argue for previously. He's in year 2 in this Brian Daboll system. Brian Daboll had a great season last year, coach of the year. Daniel Jones did all this without a really good offensive line outside of Andrew Thomas's breakout season. Let's dig into that. Daniel Jones had 90 pressured throws last year. Even in those 90 pressured throws, he had only 18 danger plays and only 15 interceptable passes. He had the top true completion percentage in the league at 75.7%. He had a 64.7% red zone completion percentage. He had a 72% completion percentage with a clean pocket. So all this tells me that he's getting it done on all levels every time. Was he throwing it down the field very often? Not really, but can we expect more of that this year? Maybe so. And he did this with receivers that weren't separating and dropping 29 passes over the course of a season as well. And we can't forget with Daniel Jones, we have to talk about the value Konami thing that he brings to the table. 700 rushing yards last season. He's not on that tier with Justin Fields. He's not on that tier with Jalen Hurts and Lamar Jackson. He's a tier below, so he's going to bring you some value there. You can get him a little bit later in drafts. Maybe not in super flex, but in redraft, you'll be able to wait on him a little bit and get some good value. Had 44.3 rushing yards and 7 touchdowns last year. Like we said, 700 yards. We're going to go back to their Darren Waller thing because I think it's that big for him. And with that low ceiling in the passing game, he had 15 touchdowns last year. If he only gets up to 22 or 25 touchdown passes this year, very doable with Darren Waller, we're talking about a big return on your investment right there. So in that top 5 range of outcomes, he could be one of the top 5 quarterbacks in fantasy if everything falls right. So what I'm saying is buy my man Danny Dimes, buy him with pride, get him before the buy window closes because the buy window is going to close because the hype train is going to build.
I agree that I think it's going to be a crazy hype train for Daniel Jones this year. There's a really interesting question from Gator J related to his big acquisition. So he has the better tight end now, right? We got Darren Waller in. You expect some possible, an increase in receptions there. Do you expect his rushing yards to repeat with him having better targets to throw to this year? Or will that take a dip for the sake of him having a few more passing yards?
I think it has to, if we're being honest. I think he has to go from 700 to probably that 400 to 500 range just because of the fact that you have Darren Waller to have those checkdowns to. You have Saquon Barkley for checkdowns. But with a guy who is athletic as Daniel Jones, we've seen the memes of how fast he was running at one time before he tripped over his feet. The guy can move like 22 miles an hour or whatever it was. So there are going to be some design runs in there at some point during the season. They're going to use those legs as a weapon, even if it's not the passing game. So can we expect some drop off? Yes. Is it going to crater and be falling off the face of the earth? I don't think so.
Yeah, I agree. I mean, Brian Daboll appears to be a very smart man at his job. And with how successful Daniel Jones is with his legs, I can't imagine them just taking that out of the playbook and taking that out of the plan. So, no, I agree completely. All right, so the next sleeper I want to talk about, the last guy that I want to highlight tonight is Treylon Burks, wide receiver for the Tennessee Titans. So I'm just going to get the negatives out of the way first. Yes, Burks plays in a run-first offense, and yes, they're a they're a run-heavy offense with Derrick Henry. Now, the quarterback isn't all that great either with Ryan Tannehill. However, Burks did bring in 50% of his contested catch opportunities last year. So he does have the ability to overcome some bad quarterback play. He's the very clear wide receiver one on this team. He still has the size and speed and athleticism that so many of us dynasty managers were excited about last offseason and had the Titans so excited that they sent off A.J. Brown for a first-round pick that they used to draft Treylon Burks instead of paying A.J., which, whether that's the right decision or not is a whole nother topic. And spoiler, it wasn't the right decision. But nevertheless, it did happen. And his total counting stats from his rookie year don't look all that great, due to injuries and him starting the season. On those snap percentages, however, he did finish with 1.75 yards per route run, which was best on the team, 5th among rookie receivers, ahead of a lot of people's favorite rookie, George Pickens. So that he did flash some evidence that he could be great. Now, I believe we got a small preview of what a healthy Treylon Burks at his best can look like in Week 11 last year, whenever he went for 7 receptions on 8 targets for 111 yards against Green Bay. Right now, he's currently going off the board around wide receiver 37 behind guys like Pickens that I mentioned, which Burks was better than on a yards per route run basis last year. Now, what I will say is if Burks isn't the number one guy for Tennessee next year, I believe the only guy currently on the roster that could unseat him is the one that Rhett is about to talk about right now.
Chiggy, 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 can't you see? Sometimes your moves just hypnotize me. Let's go. Let's talk Chig and Clockwell, baby. All right, first off, huge guy, 6'2", 243 pounds, giving me Shannon Sharp vibes just in terms of size alone. Giving me Shannon Sharp vibes in terms of the athleticism. 4'5", 240 was 96th percentile, 112.8 speed score, 92nd percentile. So we know he's an elite athlete. What we're going to focus on in terms of what makes him a sleeper is how he emerged toward the end of 2023. In 6 of his last 7 games, he had 4 or more targets. He had, in that stretch, 3 finishes as a tight end 1 in the last 7 games. That's pretty good. Counting stats, not all there. 32 receptions, 450, 3 touchdowns. Most of those came in the last 7 games, but like we said, was emerging as the year went on. In those few snaps that he played, he was targeted 1 out of 3 times, 33.3% target rate, had a 7.9 average depth of target, and had 5 deep targets despite being only targeted 46 times in total. Ended top wide receiver in terms of yards per reception, 14.1 yards, 3.26 yards per route run, 9.8 yards per target. All of these are solid measurables that you can project out and say, man, this guy could be a threat in 2023. Yes, I get it. I made this mistake last year with Alberto in Denver. Unproven tight ends are a crapshoot. But that's why we're calling him a sleeper at the end of the day, because you don't know what you're going to expect. But if you can find him later on in a draft and you're looking for somebody who can give you league-winning upside, Chiggy is one of those guys, and those efficiency numbers have told me that he's earned that right to be seen as a sleeper and someone you could roll the dice on late in the draft in 2023.
I like it, man. I like it. It's bold for us to both take a shot on the Tennessee pass catcher, giving their passing offense. But I mean, somebody's got to catch the ball out there. But I think that Gator J raises a very fair question for the Tennessee offense. What happens if Tennessee drafts a wide receiver in the 2nd round? You read. I'll let you go first. Will that change how you feel about your sleeper at all?
Yes, but I'm going to say this. Based off of what we have already, between both of us taking Tennessee guys, we're not sure how good Tennessee is really going to be. We don't know if Tennessee's taking a quarterback in the 1st round this year, which has been mocked out quite a bit lately. I've seen some Hendon Hooker. I've seen some Will Levis. I've seen them trading up possibly to the 3 spot to take a quarterback. So the bottom line is, at the end of the day, anything that is Tennessee pass catcher related in 2023 is going to be a risky proposition. So let's just get that out in the open now. I'm going to say, if you're going to take a risk on a Treylon Burks or a Chiggy, you're buying with extreme caution, because that is what it is. We don't know what that offense is this year.
Right. Yeah. And so if they bring a 2nd round guy in, I would think he's probably going to be behind both Burks and Chig in the pecking order, but it would make it a more murky wide receiver and pass catching room than there is right now. So definitely would, hurt their value at least a little bit. So Chris, hit us, man. Who's your sleeper you want to talk about?
It's Cam Akers, running back, Los Angeles Rams. Over the last 6 weeks of the fantasy season last year, Akers showed what he can do. 3 of those weeks he finished as a running back 1. And one of those weeks he finished as the running back 1, where he touched the ball 25 times for 137 yards and 3 touchdowns. The Rams won't be adding a running back in free agency. They don't have any significant draft capital to make a luxury pick like a running back early in the draft. They could take one a bit later, but I don't see that running back that they choose to pose any significant threat to his job. Akers is a sleeper heading into the 2023 season because he's being drafted as a high-end running back 3 with the probability of finishing the season as a high-end RB2, low-end RB1, with his ADP being RB26. Quite simply, it's success due strictly to opportunity and lack of competition, which makes Cam Akers the ultimate 0 RB, anchor RB, however you want to do it. If you're drafting RBs late, Cam Akers should be your guy.
Yeah, you're speaking to my soul, man. As a Rams fan, I couldn't agree more. I'll be surprised if they spend a day 2 draft capital on a running back this year. They do have 3 day 2 picks, but there's so many holes on the team.
Exactly.
They just They just traded Allen Robinson over, so now their wide receiver room is even more thin than it was before. Like now they have damn near double digit day 3 picks, so sure you could expect they'll probably add somebody day 3, but somebody, to your point, I think that will be behind Cam Akers at that point.
Yeah.
I would be heartbroken if they choose to use one of their very few day 2 picks on a running back at this point with the roster standing the way it is. As Gator J said here, there's so many questions in that Rams offense right now. But as we stand right now, one thing that's very clear is that Cam Akers should get all the work he wants and then some. And opportunity is king at the end of the day whenever it comes to fantasy football. And so you can't be mad getting Cam Akers right now at the point where you're able to get him in drafts. So with that being said, you guys fought it out in the Fantasy and Frames courtroom for the first time this year. And we were still able to get some early sleepers in for the 2023 season to top it off. So once again, don't forget to follow the show over at Fourth and Frames on Twitter. And you can find us on Twitter at RManuel Sports, at FFChrisB, and I'm at Drew3MR. Also, don't forget to show the man behind the glass some love at FF Tyler Heil as well. Make sure to join us again next week as we discuss our top 5 position rankings for the 2023 rookie class. It's our last show before the NFL draft, so we got to get these rookie rankings in and see how much things changes between pre-draft and post-draft. So we might even throw in a rookie mock as well, so we can kind of see how much the NFL draft really changes things. So on behalf of my boys Rhett and Chris, I'm Drew. This has been another episode of Fourth and Frames. Until next week, y'all take care. We're out.